In the dim, impersonal glow of a hotel room overlooking the scattered lights of Denver, the only sounds were the rustle of expensive sheets and the soft, ragged gasps of breath. His voice was a low murmur, laced with a desperate edge of conflict. "Chloe, we shouldn't—" Amelia, a slender hand, nails painted a deep crimson, gently traced the line of his jaw before pressing a finger to his lips, silencing him. "Shh, Liam." Her whisper was a silken thread in the darkness, intoxicating and absolute. "Amelia isn't here. Only we are," he groaned, a sound torn between protest and surrender, his resistance melting away under her touch, under the sheer, undeniable heat of the moment. Her name left his lips again, no longer a question, but a prayer, a surrender. "Oh God, Chloe, right there." Her own soft sounds of pleasure answered him, a quiet confirmation of their shared transgression, a secret kept between the four walls of this anonymous room. Miles away, in a house that was anything but anonymous, a house built on years of shared dreams and quiet affections, Amelia sat alone. The warm light of a single lamp pooled around her favorite armchair, illuminating the pages of a novel she had read 3 times without absorbing a single word. The silence in their carefully curated home was immense, a living entity that seemed to press in on her from all sides. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 11, each note a small, clear indictment of the lateness of the hour. She glanced at her phone, her thumb hovering over her husband's last message, sent 2 hours ago. The words were familiar, a common refrain in their busy lives. "Gonna be late, babe. This merger meeting is a killer. Don't wait up." She sighed softly, a little puff of air into the stillness. He was always working so hard, pushing for their future. She should be proud, and she was. But tonight, a strange, formless anxiety coiled in her stomach. She dismissed it as fatigue. It was nothing. Everything was fine. After all, her best friend, Chloe, had texted her an hour ago with a cascade of heart emojis. "Sleep well, sweetie. Talk tomorrow." Amelia had smiled then, feeling grateful for her 2 constants, a loving husband and a loyal best friend. Now, however, the silence felt different. It felt heavier, colder, filled with an unspoken truth she was not yet ready to hear. From the outside, the life of Amelia and Liam Thorne was a masterclass in modern success, a carefully constructed piece of architecture as flawless as the homes Amelia herself designed. Their house, perched in the affluent hills overlooking Denver, was a testament to their shared ambition. It was a structure of glass and steel and warm cedar, with windows that drank in the vast, dramatic sky of Colorado. Inside, every surface was curated, every piece of furniture a statement of quiet, expensive taste. Their life, much like their home, was built on clean lines, mutual respect, and a schedule that ran with the precision of a Swiss watch. They were, to everyone who knew them, the perfect couple. Liam, with his sharp suits, confident smile, and a rising career in finance that saw him conquering markets with a cool, calculated aggression. And Amelia, whose creative spirit was tempered by a meticulous attention to detail, her reputation as a brilliant interior architect growing with every magazine feature. They were a power couple, their individual successes reflecting and amplifying the others, creating a dazzling whole. Their mornings began before sunrise, a silent dance of efficiency in their state-of-the-art kitchen, the soft whir of the espresso machine, the quiet rustle of the Financial Times, the light tap of Amelia's pen against her sketchbook. They moved around each other with an easy familiarity, their conversations a shorthand of logistics and plans. "I have the Henderson meeting at 10, so I'll be home late," he'd say, kissing her forehead, a gesture that was once filled with passion but had, over 8 years, softened into a tender, almost brotherly habit. "Okay," she'd reply, her eyes already lost in the floor plan spread across their marble island. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Gallaghers on Friday." Their love was a well-managed portfolio, stable, secure, and predictably profitable. It was a comfortable partnership that had long since traded the volatile highs of passion for the steady returns of companionship. They still held hands during their evening walks, their fingers interlocking out of habit. They still said "I love you" before turning off the lights, the words a gentle, reflexive cadence to end the day. But the space between them, even when their bodies were close, was growing, filled with the quiet hum of their individual ambitions and the unspoken truth that their shared dream had been achieved, leaving them with nothing new to build together. Into this perfectly ordered world, Chloe danced, a vibrant splash of color against their minimalist canvas. She wasn't just Amelia's best friend, she was a fundamental part of their unit, the unofficial third member of their family. Where Amelia was serene and composed, with a timeless beauty that was elegant and understated, Chloe was a supernova. A successful art gallery manager, she lived her life with an unapologetic vivacity. Her laughter was loud and infectious. Her style was bold, and her presence could fill a room the moment she walked in. She had a key to their house and would often let herself in on a Saturday afternoon, a bottle of expensive wine in one hand and a whirlwind of stories in the other. Amelia loved her for that, for the way she could effortlessly pull her out of her own focused mind. Liam, too, seemed to relax around Chloe, his corporate stiffness dissolving in the face of her playful energy. The three of them were a fixture in Denver's social scene, dinners at exclusive restaurants, weekends, skiing in Aspen, fundraisers where they moved through the crowd as a seamless, attractive trio. Chloe was Amelia's confidant, the keeper of all her secrets, the sister she never had, and she was Liam's buddy, the one who could debate sports with him with as much fervor as she discussed contemporary art with Amelia. She was the glue, the spark, the vibrant thread that wove their lives together. The foundations of this perfect life, however, were not as solid as they appeared. A subtle discontent had been growing in Liam for months, a quiet, gnawing hunger for something more. He was a man who thrived on conquest, on the thrill of the win. At work, he was a titan, closing multi-million-dollar deals, earning the respect and envy of his peers. But when he came home, the adrenaline of his victory would slowly dissipate in the calm, orderly atmosphere of their perfect house. He craved recognition, not just acknowledgement. He yearned for his successes to be celebrated with the same feverish intensity with which he achieved them. Amelia, bless her heart, was supportive in her own way. She was proud of him. She told him so. But her pride was a quiet, steady thing, another well-placed piece of furniture in the grand design of their life. Her own career was demanding, her creative mind constantly whirring with projects, deadlines, and the intricate dance of satisfying her wealthy clients. She saw his success as a shared victory, a given, another brick in the fortress of their security. She didn't always see the battle he had fought to win it. This disconnect came to a head on a Tuesday evening in late autumn. Liam walked through the door, his entire body thrumming with a rare, potent euphoria. He had just spent 10 hours in a brutal negotiation, and he had emerged victorious, landing an account that would redefine his career. He was electric with the triumph. He found Amelia in her home office, surrounded by fabric samples and paint swatches, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We got it," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "The entire Northwest portfolio. We landed it." Amelia looked up, her mind clearly still on shades of charcoal and slate. She blinked, then a warm, genuine smile spread across her face. "Oh my God, Liam, that's incredible. I knew you would." She stood up, gave him a proper kiss, her lips warm and familiar. "We have to open that special bottle of champagne tonight to celebrate." And then, almost in the same breath, she turned back to her desk, picking up 2 different swatches. "What do you think?" she asked, holding them up. "For the Aspen project, the textured linen or the raw silk?" And just like that, the air went out of him. The massive career-defining victory was suddenly just another item on the evening's agenda, placed somewhere between choosing upholstery and drinking champagne. He knew she didn't mean to be dismissive. He knew she was genuinely happy for him. But the celebration felt like a footnote to her own pressing deadline. The conversation he had craved, the deep dive into the strategy, the rehashing of the tense moments, the shared basking in the glory of the win, it never happened. They drank the champagne, and she toasted to him, her eyes sparkling, but her mind was elsewhere, and he could feel it. Later that night, as he lay in bed next to her sleeping form, he stared at the ceiling, feeling a profound and unsettling loneliness. He looked at his beautiful, brilliant, successful wife, the woman who was his partner in every sense of the word, and he felt utterly and completely unseen. He had conquered the world today, but it felt like no one had noticed. It was in that cold, quiet moment, in the perfect bedroom of his perfect house, that the first hairline crack appeared in the foundation of his perfect life. He was starting to crave an audience, and he was beginning to realize, with a dawning sense of dread and excitement, that he might know exactly where to find one. The morning after the hollow victory was gray and cool, the Denver sky, a flat, muted canvas. The celebratory champagne bottle sat on the kitchen counter, its foil neck stripped and its purpose served, yet it looked like a sad relic from a party that had never truly happened. Liam stood by the window, sipping his black coffee, watching the city slowly come to life below. Amelia was already in her element, a whirlwind of focused energy, taking a call with a contractor, her voice a calm, authoritative hum. She gestured towards the blueprints on the island, a pencil tucked behind her ear, completely absorbed. To her, the previous night's news was a settled fact, a goal achieved and checked off the list. For Liam, the anticlimax of it all had settled into a heavy, sour residue in his chest. He felt like a ghost in his own life, his greatest professional triumph already fading into the perfectly designed background of their home. He drove to his office, a sleek, glass-walled tower in the heart of the financial district. He sat at his large mahogany desk, the panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains, usually a source of power and inspiration, but today it only made him feel small. His phone buzzed a flurry of congratulatory emails and texts from colleagues and partners. Each one gave him a small jolt of satisfaction, but it wasn't the same. They were congratulating the professional, the financial consultant. He craved something more personal, a validation that saw the man behind the deal. His thumb hovered over his contacts, scrolling past his mother, past his brother, and landing on Chloe's name. He hesitated. Calling her felt different. It felt like a deliberate act of seeking something elsewhere. It was a small betrayal, perhaps, to admit even to himself that his wife's reaction hadn't been enough. But the need, the quiet ache for genuine, unadulterated praise, was stronger than the guilt. He pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring, her voice a warm, energetic burst that cut through the sterile silence of his office. "Liam Thorne, to what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you're already trying to buy some wildly expensive piece of art to celebrate." He laughed, a real laugh that felt like the first authentic sound he'd made all day. "Something like that, Chloe. Actually, I had some news." He told her then about the Northwest portfolio, trying to keep his voice level, professional, as if it were just another Tuesday update. The explosion of joy on the other end of the line was immediate and overwhelming. "Oh my God, Liam, you didn't. You actually closed it? That is monumental. You are an absolute rock star." Her enthusiasm was a physical force, a wave of warmth and energy that crashed over him through the phone. It was pure, undiluted excitement entirely for him. "You have to tell me everything. I mean every single glorious detail. I want to know how you made them fold. I want to know what you were wearing when you crushed their souls." He found himself talking for 20 minutes, recounting the entire negotiation, the subtle strategies, the moment he knew he had them cornered. And she listened, truly listened, interrupting only with gasps of admiration and sharp, intelligent questions. She wasn't just hearing his story, she was living it with him. "So, what did Amelia do?" Chloe finally asked, her voice brimming with expectation. "Did she throw you a parade? I hope you two did something amazing to celebrate." The question hung in the air, innocent on the surface, but it lanced the very heart of his disappointment. "Ah, yeah," he stammered, the lie feeling clumsy in his mouth. We opened some champagne. It was nice. You know how she is, busy with the Aspen House." The silence that followed from Chloe's end was more potent than any words. It was a silence that understood. "I see," she said, her voice softening with an empathy that felt like a balm on a raw wound. "She's so deep in her own creative world sometimes. A beautiful world, of course, the one she builds. But it must be hard for her to see the battles you're fighting in yours. A win like this, Liam, it deserves more than just a glass of champagne. It deserves fireworks." "Let me take you to lunch," she insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "The company can expense it. We'll call it an art consultation for a new high-value client. You, my friend, are going to be celebrated properly." An hour later, they were sitting across from each other in a discreet, sunlit bistro. Chloe looked radiant, wearing a silk blouse the color of emeralds. her eyes sparkling with the same vibrant energy. She made him tell the story all over again, and he did, this time with more detail, more emotion. He felt his posture change, his voice growing stronger as he spoke, basking in the glow of her undivided attention. She leaned forward, her chin propped on her hand, her gaze locked on his. She made him feel like the most interesting, powerful man in the world. Under the influence of her rapt attention and a glass of crisp Sauvignon Blanc, his carefully constructed walls began to crumble. "It's not that she's not proud," he heard himself saying, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "She is. But it feels transactional. Like I just deposited another large sum into our joint account of success. It doesn't feel like a victory we share anymore." He confessed the loneliness he felt, the sense of being a co-manager in the enterprise of their marriage rather than a passionate partner. He spoke of the comfortable, predictable silence that had replaced their once lively conversations. He was complaining about his wife to his wife's best friend, and he knew it was a terrible, unforgivable line to cross. But it felt too good to be understood, too cathartic to finally give voice to the formless discontent that had been haunting him. Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't defend Amelia, nor did she criticize her. She simply listened, her expression a perfect blend of sympathy and understanding. When he finished, she reached across the table and placed her hand on his arm. Her touch was light, fleeting, but it sent a jolt through him. "Liam," she said, her voice low and intimate, "you are an extraordinary man. You build empires. And people who build empires need a cheering section. They need someone who understands the weight of the crown." She looked at him, and in her eyes, he didn't just see a friend, he saw admiration, he saw excitement, he saw a reflection of the man he wanted to be, the victor, the titan. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Raw, unadulterated desire. It was the desire to be seen, and Chloe was seeing him with a clarity and intensity that was both terrifying and intoxicating. The lunch ended, and as they stood on the sidewalk, she gave him a quick, firm hug. "I'm proud of you, Liam Thorne," she whispered, her lips close to his ear. He went back to his office feeling validated, energized, and consumed by a profound sense of guilt. The emotional affair had begun. It had no name yet, no physical form, but it was there, a secret, shimmering thing that now existed in the space between him and Chloe, and by extension, in the space between him and his wife. The crack was no longer just a crack. It was a chasm, and he had just willingly taken his first step across it. The heat of the Colorado summer had finally broken, settling into a perfect, golden evening. It was the kind of evening that demanded a gathering, and the Thornes' annual summer barbecue was in full swing. Their expansive patio, a seamless extension of their glass-walled home, was filled with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the mellow notes of a curated jazz playlist. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and hickory smoke from the grill, where Liam, wearing a relaxed linen shirt, played the part of the consummate host. He flipped burgers with an easy smile, his eyes scanning the crowd of friends and colleagues scattered across his perfectly manicured lawn. Amelia was a vision of grace, drifting between groups of guests, her laughter light and airy. She wore a simple white sundress, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. She was in her element, the architect of not just their home, but of this perfect social tapestry. Liam watched her for a moment, a familiar swell of pride in his chest. She was beautiful, she was brilliant, she was his wife. And yet, his gaze kept drifting towards the gate, an unconscious, expectant pull towards something more. And then, she arrived. It felt less like an arrival and more like a shift in the very atmosphere of the party. Chloe didn't just walk through the gate, she made an entrance. The setting sun seemed to catch her, igniting her. She was wearing a red dress, a slash of vibrant color against the muted greens and browns of the landscape. It was a simple slip of a dress, made of a material that looked like liquid silk, clinging to every curve of her body, leaving her tanned shoulders and back bare. Her blonde hair, usually styled with artistic precision, was loose and wild, a sun-streaked cascade that tumbled around her face, and her lips, painted in a matching shade of bold, unapologetic red, were curved into a knowing smile as her eyes found Liam's across the patio. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in his direction, a secret acknowledgement that sent a jolt straight to his gut, before she was swept up in a hug by Amelia. For the next hour, Liam was caught in a strange, bifurcated reality. Half of him was present, engaging in conversations about interest rates and vacation plans, laughing at jokes, topping up drinks. The other half of him was an invisible tether, constantly, compulsively tracking Chloe's movements. He watched as she threw her head back in laughter during a conversation, the long, elegant column of her throat exposed. He watched the way her red dress swirled around her thighs as she walked across the lawn to the bar. He noticed the subtle sway of her hips, a rhythm that was both unconsciously graceful and deliberately sensual. He felt like a voyeur in his own home, cataloging details he had no right to notice. The delicate chain that rested in the hollow of her collarbone, the way she playfully bit her lower lip when listening intently to someone, the sheer magnetic confidence with which she occupied her own skin. Their lunch felt like a lifetime ago, yet the secret intimacy they had forged then was now a live current running beneath the surface of this idyllic party. Eventually, she made her way over to him at the grill, the crowd parting for her as if by instinct. "The master at work," she said, her voice a low, playful purr that was meant only for him. She leaned against the railing beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, a complex scent of jasmine and something warmer, spicier, that was uniquely her. "Everything looks amazing, Liam." He grunted a reply, his focus suddenly entirely consumed by the proximity of her bare shoulder to his arm. "Trying my best," he managed, his voice sounding rougher than he intended. Their conversation was light, a dance of witty remarks and shared jokes that excluded everyone else around them, creating a bubble of intimacy in the middle of the crowded patio. He was acutely aware of Amelia on the other side of the lawn, a pang of guilt so sharp it was almost a physical pain. But the intoxicating pull of Chloe's presence, of her focused, admiring attention, was stronger. He needed a drink, a way to cool the heat that was rising in him. "I'm grabbing a beer. You want one?" he asked, already moving towards the large steel tub filled with ice and bottles. "Always," she replied, following him. He knelt down, plunging his hands into the icy water, the cold a welcome shock. He pulled out 2 bottles, condensation dripping from the dark brown glass. He stood up and turned, and she was there, closer than he'd expected. He held one out to her, and as she reached to take it, their fingers brushed. It was nothing. A fleeting, accidental contact, but in the supercharged space between them, it was everything. His fingers grazed the back of her hand, and the moment stretched, suspended in time. He felt the impossible contrast of the icy cold bottle and the electric warmth of her skin. It was a touch that lasted no more than a second, but it carried the weight of all their unspoken conversations, all his private, burgeoning fantasies. His eyes snapped up to meet hers, and there it was. The lingering gaze. There was no pretense of friendship in her eyes now, no casual affection. What he saw reflected back at him was a mirror of his own illicit desire. It was a look of pure, unadulterated acknowledgement. It said, "I feel this too. I know you feel it. And what are we going to do about it?" The air crackled, the noise of the party fading into a distant, muffled roar. It was just the two of them, locked in a silent confession that was more intimate than any whispered words. A question was asked, and an answer was given, without a single sound passing between them. The forbidden had been named, not in speech, but in a shared, searing look of mutual want. The potential of their emotional betrayal had just been fused with the undeniable promise of a physical one. "There you two are." Amelia's cheerful voice shattered the moment like a stone through glass. They broke their gaze instantly, both of them looking slightly startled, slightly guilty. Amelia slipped her arm through Chloe's, oblivious to the seismic event that had just occurred. "Chloe, you have to come and settle a debate for us about Italian cinema." Chloe flashed a brilliant, seamless smile, a mask of easygoing charm, slipping perfectly back into place. "Lead the way," she said, allowing Amelia to pull her back into the heart of the party. She glanced back over her shoulder at Liam one last time, a quick, fleeting look. But it was enough. The promise was still there in her eyes. Liam stood rooted to the spot, his heart hammering against his ribs, a cold beer in his hand that did nothing to quell the fire she had just ignited within him. He looked at his beautiful home, his wonderful guests, his perfect wife, and knew with a terrifying certainty that he was about to risk it all. The lingering gaze at the barbecue had been like a match struck in a gas-filled room. The immediate flame had been extinguished by Amelia's timely arrival, but the air remained volatile, thick with unspoken possibilities. In the days that followed, a new and dangerous rhythm began to establish itself in the lives of Liam and Chloe. It was a rhythm dictated by the soft glow of a phone screen, the subtle vibration of a new message, the thrill of a secret shared across the city in the dead of night. Their communication became a constant, clandestine river flowing just beneath the surface of their everyday lives. Liam would be in a board meeting, presenting market projections with his usual cool authority, and would feel his phone buzz in his pocket. A glance down would reveal a message from Chloe, not a simple text, but a picture of a bizarre sculpture she'd seen, captioned with an inside joke only he would understand. He would sit at his own dinner table, across from his wife, discussing contractors and landscaping, while his mind was on the witty, flirtatious conversation he was having with Chloe under the table, his thumb dancing across the screen. Their text messages evolved, following a swift and predictable trajectory from plausible friendship to undeniable emotional infidelity. At first, they were innocuous. "Still recovering from that party," she sent the next day. "You owe me a rematch in cornhole." He'd replied in kind, the banter easy and familiar, but soon the frequency increased and the content began to shift, acquiring a new, more personal weight. The texts began to arrive later at night, after Amelia had gone to sleep. "You still up?" he wrote one night, staring at the ceiling of his dark, quiet bedroom. Her reply came instantly. "For you?" "Always." The simple words, imbued with the intimacy of the late hour, felt more potent than a love letter. He found himself telling her things he no longer told Amelia, not because he was hiding them, but because the habit of sharing had simply atrophied. He'd text her about a frustrating interaction with a client, a minor victory at work, a fleeting thought sparked by a song on the radio. She became the repository for the small, unguarded pieces of his daily existence. The flirtation, once subtle, became more daring. He sent her a photo of the sunset from his office window. She replied, "Beautiful. The view's not bad either." After he chaired a successful charity event, she texted, "Heard you were brilliant tonight. I'm not surprised. You own every room you walk into." Her praise was a drug, and he was becoming a desperate addict. It was so different from Amelia's support, which was steady and assumed, like bedrock. Chloe's admiration was a spotlight, and he craved its warm, focused beam. He began sharing his frustrations about his marriage, couched in careful, deniable terms. "Just had our weekly budget meeting," he texted, after a tense conversation with Amelia about their finances. "Felt like I was negotiating with a CFO." Chloe's reply was a masterpiece of subtle seduction and validation. "She's an architect, darling. She builds fortified worlds. You're a conqueror." Different languages. It must be exhausting trying to be a poet in a room full of accountants. She never attacked Amelia directly. Instead, she reframed his reality, casting him as a misunderstood romantic hero, and Amelia as his well-intentioned but ultimately passionless warden. This constant, secret dialogue began to warp Liam's perception of the two women who defined his life. He started to see them in stark, unfair contrast. Amelia was his reality, practical, organized, beautiful in a way that had become comfortable and familiar. She was shopping lists, mortgage payments, and coordinated social calendars. Her love was in her actions, in the flawlessly run home, the anticipated needs, the quiet stability she provided. But it was a love he now found confining, sterile. Then there was Chloe, who existed as a vibrant, intoxicating idea on his phone screen. She was spontaneity, passion, and intellectual fire. She was witty quotes, links to obscure bands, and provocative questions that kept him up at night. She was the escape. One evening, as he watched Amelia meticulously entering receipts into a spreadsheet, her brow furrowed in concentration, his phone lit up. It was a picture from Chloe. She was standing on a mountain overlook, her hair wild in the wind, a bottle of wine held up to the camera. The caption read, "Ditched work. Some days require altitude and alcohol. Wish you were here." The contrast was a physical blow. On one hand, the responsible, predictable safety of his life. On the other, a siren call to a world of impulsive freedom and passion. He didn't want to destroy his perfectly constructed life, but he was becoming obsessed with the idea of escaping it, and Chloe was offering him the key. For Chloe, this dangerous game was a complex cocktail of guilt and exhilaration. Alone in her stylish, art-filled apartment, she would read Liam's messages, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. A part of her, a deep and loyal part that genuinely loved Amelia, writhed with guilt. She was betraying the woman who was closer to her than a sister, mining the cracks in her marriage for her own gain. But another, stronger part of her felt a dizzying sense of power. For years, she had lived in the periphery of the Thorns' perfect world. She had admired it, celebrated it, and, in her darkest, most private moments, envied it. She envied Amelia's effortless grace, her settled happiness, the unwavering devotion of a man like Liam. Now, that devotion was wavering, and it was turning towards her. Liam wasn't just attracted to her, he was confiding in her, choosing her as his emotional sanctuary. Every late-night text from him, every shared secret, was a confirmation that she, not Amelia, was the one who truly understood him. It soothed a long-hidden insecurity, a fear that she was too bold, too chaotic, to ever inspire the kind of steadfast love Amelia commanded. She was proving that she could not only inspire it, she could steal it. Her replies were carefully crafted weapons, empathetic, flattering, and always leaving him wanting more, skillfully drawing him deeper into their shared conspiracy. The point of no return came on a Thursday night. Liam lay in bed, the space between him and his sleeping wife feeling like a canyon. His phone glowed in the darkness. He wrote, "It's impossible to talk to her sometimes. I feel like a ghost in my own house." Chloe's reply came instantly. "You're not a ghost, you're a fire. You just need someone who isn't afraid to get close to the flame." His heart hammered. He typed, "I can't stop thinking about the party." A pause, then, "Oh? And what exactly about the party are you thinking about?" He was trembling slightly. "The moment by the drinks. When you looked at me." The 3 dots of her typing appeared and disappeared. Finally, her message came through, a devastatingly simple sentence that sealed their fate. "I haven't stopped thinking about it either. Sleep well, Liam. I know who I'll be dreaming of tonight." He turned the phone off, plunging the room into absolute blackness. The soft, rhythmic sound of Amelia's breathing beside him was the only sound, but it was no longer a comfort. It was an accusation. He was no longer just unhappy. He was now a traitor. And he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he had no desire to turn back. The fragile truce held for 2 more weeks, a period of simmering tension and clandestine texting that felt like the quiet before a storm. The storm finally broke on a Friday night, over something as trivial as a weekend away. They had planned a trip to a secluded cabin near Aspen, a trip Liam had been desperately looking forward to as a potential lifeline, a chance to disconnect from the world and perhaps reconnect with his wife. He came home from work to find Amelia on the phone, a look of intense concentration on her face. When she hung up, she turned to him, her eyes bright, with an excitement that made his stomach clench. "Incredible news," she said. "The publisher from Architectural Digest is in town, just for the weekend. He wants to see the Aspen project in person. This could be the cover, Liam." The cover? Liam stared at her, the packed duffel bag by the door suddenly looking pathetic and naive. "The cover," he repeated, his voice flat. "What about our weekend? The cabin?" Amelia waved a dismissive hand, already moving towards her laptop. "We can postpone. This is a once-in-a-career opportunity. You understand, right? It's for us, for our future." And that was it, the final damning piece of evidence. It was always for us, always for the future, a perpetually receding horizon that they never seemed to reach. His need, his desire for a simple, quiet weekend with his wife, was an insignificant variable in the grand equation of their success. "I don't understand, Amelia," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I don't understand how everything, absolutely everything, becomes secondary to the next project, the next achievement." The argument that followed was not loud or theatrical. It was quiet, cold, and far more vicious. Words became weapons, each one precisely chosen to inflict maximum damage, honed by years of unspoken resentments. He accused her of being married to her work, of being emotionally absent. She accused him of being needy, of not appreciating the sacrifices she was making for their life. The fight ended, as it always did, in a stalemate of icy silence. Liam grabbed his car keys from the bowl by the door. "I'm going out," he said, not looking at her. "Don't wait up." He was in his car, driving aimlessly through the glittering, indifferent city streets before he even consciously decided where he was going. But his hands knew. His thumb unlocked his phone and pressed the contact that had become his only true north. Chloe answered immediately, as if she had been waiting. "Liam, what's wrong? You sound awful." He didn't have to pretend. He didn't have to manage his tone or choose his words. He just let the raw, ragged anger and hurt pour out of him. I have to get out of here." "The Crimson Door," she said, her voice a calm, steady anchor in his chaotic sea of emotion. "It's quiet. I'll be there in 20. The bar was a sanctuary of shadows and secrets. Tucked away on a side street, its interior was all dark wood, deep velvet booths, and lighting so low it felt like a perpetual twilight. It was the kind of place where you could disappear. Chloe was already there, tucked into a corner booth, a glass of whiskey waiting for him. She looked stunning, as always, in a simple black dress that seemed to absorb the dim light around her. She didn't press him for details, just let him talk, his words tumbling out in a bitter, frustrated torrent. He told her about the trip, the magazine, the fight. He told her about the profound, crushing loneliness of being in a marriage that felt more like a business partnership. She listened, her eyes never leaving his face, her expression a mask of perfect, unwavering empathy. She absorbed his pain, validated his anger, and made him feel sane. When he finally fell silent, exhausted from his own tirade, she reached across the table, her cool fingers wrapping around his wrist. The touch was electric, a stark contrast to the cold void he felt at home. "Liam," she said, her voice a low, hypnotic murmur, "you give so much. You work so hard to build this incredible life. You deserve a partner who sees you, not just what you provide." She paused, letting the words sink in, her thumb gently stroking the inside of his wrist. "She doesn't appreciate you, Liam." The words, so simple, so direct, landed with the force of a revelation. It was the validation he had been desperately seeking, the permission he needed to feel entirely wronged. It wasn't his fault for being unhappy. It was Amelia's fault for not seeing him, for not appreciating him. Chloe's words expertly shifted the blame, absolving him of his own discontent and recasting his secret emotional betrayal as a justifiable search for solace. He drove her home through the rain-slicked streets, the city lights blurring into long, impressionistic streaks. The car was a cocoon, the soft strains of a jazz station filling the heavy silence between them. The whiskey, the lateness of the hour, and the raw intimacy of their conversation had stripped away the last of their pretenses. The air was thick with a tension that was almost unbearable, a physical presence in the small, confined space. He pulled up in front of her apartment building, leaving the engine to idle in a low, expectant hum. This was the moment for him to say goodnight, to retreat back to his own life, to the Cold War waiting for him at home. He turned to her, a string of safe, meaningless words on his lips. "Thanks for listening, Chloe." But he never finished. She was already leaning towards him, her face illuminated by the faint green glow of the dashboard. Her eyes, dark and serious, held his. Her scent filled his senses, and then her lips were on his. For a single fleeting second, the last vestiges of his conscience fought back. A faint whisper in his mind, Amelia's face, their wedding photo on the mantelpiece. "Chloe," he breathed against her mouth, a sound that was less a protest and more a surrender. "No, we can't." She pulled back, just an inch, her forehead resting against his. Her voice was a husky whisper, a seductive rationalization for the sin they were about to commit. "Is it wrong, Liam?" she murmured, her breath warm on his skin. "Or does it just feel right?" And in that moment it did. It felt like the only right thing in a world that had felt wrong for so long. It felt like breathing after being held underwater. The guilt, the loyalty, the vows, they all dissolved in the overwhelming, selfish, and desperate need to feel wanted. He closed the small distance between them, and his mouth met hers again, this time with no hesitation. The kiss was not gentle or romantic. It was a collision, a frantic, desperate act. It was fueled by months of frustration, by unspoken desire, by the intoxicating taste of whiskey and rebellion. It was the taste of a line being irrevocably crossed, a door slamming shut on the man he used to be. They broke apart, breathless, their faces inches apart in the shadows of the car. The sound of the rain and the idling engine were the only sounds in the world. They had done it. The betrayal was no longer emotional, no longer a secret kept in the digital ether. It was real. It was physical. And they both knew, with a terrifying, exhilarating certainty, that this was not the end. It was the beginning. The kiss in the car was a lit fuse, and the hotel room was the inevitable explosion. There was no discussion, no weighing of consequences. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, Liam's eyes asked the question, and Chloe's answered with a slow, deliberate nod. He put the car in drive, and the city lights became a meaningless blur. As he navigated towards a discreet, upscale boutique hotel, he knew of a place of hushed corridors and anonymous doors, a perfect non-place for an act that existed outside of their real lives. The room was a cocoon of muted tones, charcoal and cream, with a single, massive window that framed the glittering expanse of the Denver skyline. The city looked like a distant, silent constellation, a world to which they no longer belonged. The only sound was the soft hum of the ventilation and the frantic, syncopated rhythm of their own hearts. For a long moment, they just stood in the center of the room, caught in the gravity of the silent, waiting bed. The months of furtive glances, charged text messages, and unspoken desire culminated in this single, terrifying, exhilarating point. Liam moved first. His hands, which could command financial markets with unshakable confidence, trembled slightly as he reached for the zipper at the back of Chloe's black dress. The sound of its slow, deliberate descent was deafening in the silence, a point-by-point dismantling of the last barrier between them. The fabric parted, and he slid the dress from her shoulders, letting it pool around her feet like a black silken shadow. And then, he simply stared. She had planned for this moment. Beneath the dress, she wore a set of intricate black lace lingerie. It was not the practical, comfortable lingerie of a long-term relationship. It was a weapon, a costume chosen specifically for this seduction. The lace was a delicate web that both concealed and revealed, hinting at the pale, soft skin beneath. The bra pushed her full, round breasts upwards, creating a deep, shadowed cleavage. The matching panties were cut high on her hips, accentuating their generous curve and the slimness of her waist. She was a fantasy made real, the living embodiment of every illicit thought he had entertained for months. A soft, choked sound escaped his lips, and he reached out, his fingers tracing the delicate edge of the lace on her shoulder. Her skin was warm, alive. "Liam," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a final, token test of his resolve. "Are you sure?" He didn't answer with words. He answered by closing the remaining space between them, his mouth finding hers again, his hands moving from her shoulders to her back, pressing her body against his. The kiss was different now, no longer the desperate, frantic collision in the car. It was slower, deeper, a conscious exploration of a territory he had only ever imagined. He tasted the whiskey on her tongue, the faint sweetness of her lipstick, the raw, undeniable heat of her desire. His hands roamed, learning the shape of her. He felt the smooth skin of her back, the sharp line of her spine, the soft, yielding swell of her hips beneath his palms. He fumbled with the clasp of her bra, his fingers clumsy with haste and anticipation. The lace fell away, and he gasped as he saw her, the sight of her bare, perfect breasts stealing the air from his lungs. They were heavy and full, the nipples taut. He lowered his head, his lips closing over one, and a deep, guttural moan was torn from Chloe's throat. That sound broke the last of his restraint. The slow discovery gave way to a desperate, consuming urgency. Clothes were discarded, a trail of his shirt and her lacy secrets left on the plush carpet. They tumbled onto the cool, crisp sheets of the bed, their bodies finally, fully colliding. It was a frantic tangle of limbs, a desperate attempt to get closer, to erase the years they had spent as just friends, to obliterate the image of the wife waiting for him at home. "Liam, please," she breathed, The word, both a plea and a permission slip. His name was a constant, ragged sound on her lips. His own voice was a low growl, thick with a passion he hadn't felt in a decade. "Tell me you want this, Chloe," he commanded, his lips against her neck, needing to hear it, to make the transgression a shared, spoken choice. "Tell me everything." Her answer was not in words, but in the way she arched her back, her nails digging into his shoulders, her hips rising to meet his. It was a language their bodies spoke fluently, a primal dialect of pure, unadulterated need. The room filled with the sounds of their passion, the rustle of sheets, the soft, wet sound of kisses, the sharp, indrawn gasps, and the low, continuous moans of pleasure that neither of them tried to suppress. Here, in this anonymous bubble, they were free from judgment, free from consequences. Her initial weak resistance had shattered, replaced by an open, abandoned craving. She moved with him, for him, her body a testament to a desire that matched his own. "Oh, Liam." "Yes," she cried out, her head thrown back against the pillows. "Just like that. Don't stop." He was lost, adrift in a sea of pure sensation, the scent of her perfume, the silk of her hair against his cheek, the incredible feeling of her body yielding to his. He was no longer a husband, a respectable professional. He was just a man, driven by a raw, selfish hunger, and she was the feast he had been starving for. The crescendo was a violent, shattering release, a moment of oblivion where the only thing that existed was the two of them, their bodies locked together, their ragged breaths filling the sudden, profound silence. Afterwards, they lay tangled in the wreckage of the sheets, their sweat-slicked bodies slowly cooling. The adrenaline faded, and the silence that rushed in to fill the void was heavier now, freighted with the enormity of their act. The city lights outside the window seemed brighter, colder, a reminder of the world they would have to return to. Liam looked at Chloe, her face flushed, her lips swollen from his kisses, her eyes closed in a state of boneless exhaustion. She was beautiful, and she was his. At least, for tonight. He felt a surge of possessive triumph, quickly followed by a cold, sickening wave of guilt. He had done it. He had cheated on Amelia. The word felt stark and ugly in the quiet of the room. He had taken the first crack in his marriage and deliberately, violently, smashed it into 1,000 irreparable pieces. He pulled the sheet over them, a futile gesture of hiding from what they had become. But there was no hiding. The anatomy of their desire had been laid bare, and it was a thing of beautiful, destructive, and terrible power. That first night in the boutique hotel was not an ending, but a beginning. It was the opening of a door to a secret world, and once they had stepped through, they found they had no desire to go back. The affair did not continue in a frantic, guilt-ridden panic. Instead, it settled into a shockingly comfortable, dangerously addictive routine. Guilt, they discovered, was a malleable emotion. In the beginning, it was a sharp, stabbing pain for Liam every time he walked through his front door and saw Amelia's trusting face. But soon, the guilt began to feel like a toll, a small price to pay for the intoxicating vibrancy he now felt with Chloe. The lies, once clumsy and difficult, became slick and easy, polished with practice. This merger is a killer became their go-to alibi, a convenient and impenetrable shield. A late dinner with clients was a 2-hour tryst in their usual room 712. A weekend business seminar in the mountains was a stolen 48 hours of uninterrupted passion, where they could pretend to be two entirely different people, unbound by history or consequence. Liam became a master of compartmentalization, the architect of a life split into two irreconcilable halves. With Chloe, he was alive. Their hotel room became a sanctuary, a confessional, a playground. They didn't just meet for sex, they talked for hours, sharing dreams and frustrations with a raw honesty he had never known. He felt seen by her in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. She saw his ambition not as a threat to their intimacy, but as a part of his appeal. She celebrated his ruthlessness in business, finding it exciting. Their lovemaking was a reflection of this. It was passionate, experimental, and deeply connected. In her arms, he felt like the man he had always wanted to be, powerful, desired, and understood. He would watch her as she dressed after they made love, the soft glow of the city lights tracing the curves of her body, and he would feel a surge of possessive, desperate love for this woman who was his secret, his escape. Then he would go home, Crossing the threshold of his own house felt like stepping through a portal into a different dimension, a world rendered in shades of gray. The vibrant, technicolor life he lived with Chloe vanished, leaving behind a dull, sterile silence. Amelia, once the center of his world, now felt like a stranger, the polite and efficient co-manager of their shared life. Their conversations, which had once flowed with laughter and shared dreams, were now reduced to a series of logistical exchanges. "Did you remember to call the plumber?" The Gallaghers confirmed for Friday. "Don't forget, we have to file our estimated taxes." The home he had once taken such pride in now felt like a beautiful, opulent prison. Every perfectly placed piece of furniture, every tasteful work of art, seemed to mock him, a testament to a life that looked perfect on the outside but was hollowed out and rotting from within. His interactions with his wife became a masterpiece of evasion. Her touch, which he had once craved, now felt like an intrusion, a reminder of his betrayal. When she would reach for his hand as they sat on the couch, he would allow it, but his hand would lie limp and unresponsive in hers. When she kissed him goodnight, he would turn his head at the last second, so her lips met his cheek in a chaste, friendly gesture. He was a ghost in his own marriage, his body present, but his heart, his mind, his soul, they were all in room 712 with Chloe. He would find himself getting irrationally irritated by the little things about Amelia that he once found charming. The way she organized the pantry, her meticulous planning of their social life, her practical nature. He now saw these qualities not as strengths, but as evidence of a lack of passion, a lack of the wild, spontaneous spirit he found so intoxicating in Chloe. Amelia was not a fool. She felt the shift with every fiber of her being. It was not a sudden earthquake, but a slow, tectonic drift, pulling their two continents apart. She felt him receding from her, day by day, inch by inch. She felt the coldness in his touch, the emptiness in his eyes when he looked at her. She noticed him guarding his phone, its screen angled away from her, a small, constant act of concealment. She sometimes caught a faint scent on his clothes when he came home late, a floral, musky perfume that was not hers. But the truth was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that her mind refused to go there. Her husband and her best friend? It was the plot of a trashy movie, not her life. So she rationalized. It was stress from work, this new massive portfolio. He was under immense pressure, and he was withdrawing to cope. It was a phase, and she, as his loving, supportive wife, had to be patient. She tried to bridge the growing chasm between them. She cooked his favorite meals, only to watch him pick at his food, his attention lost to the muted television or the glow of his phone. She planned a surprise date night at the restaurant where he had proposed, hoping to rekindle a spark of the old romance. He was appreciative, he said all the right things, but his enthusiasm felt hollow, his performance of a loving husband just a little too practiced. He went through the motions, but he wasn't there. The evening felt like a painful pantomime, and she came home feeling more lonely and rejected than ever. The more she tried to pull him closer, the further he seemed to drift away, leaving her reaching for a phantom in the cold emptiness of their perfect home. Chloe, her dearest friend, was her only solace. Amelia would call her, sometimes in tears, confiding her fears and confusion. "He's just so distant lately," Amelia would say, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I feel like I'm losing him." And on the other end of the line, Chloe, her voice a perfect symphony of concern and sympathy, would soothe her. "Oh, honey, don't worry. It's just the pressure from his work. You know how he gets. Just give him some space. He'll come back to you. He always does." And she would hang up the phone, her heart, a cold, hard knot of triumph and deceit before getting ready to meet Amelia's husband at their hotel. The nights became the hardest for Amelia. She would lie awake in their king-size bed, the space between her and Liam feeling as vast and cold as a glacier. He would turn his back to her the moment his head hit the pillow, his breathing quickly settling into the deep, even rhythm of sleep, an easy escape she could not find. She would lie there for hours, staring into the darkness, listening to the quiet hum of their perfect house, and feel a profound, terrifying sense of wrongness. Something was broken. A vital piece of her life had been stolen, and she had no idea who the thief was or what exactly they had taken. She only knew that she was alone, truly and completely alone, in the dark. The affair, once a terrifying and novel transgression, had now acquired the familiar cadence of a ritual. The sharp edges of guilt had been worn smooth by repetition, replaced by a confident, possessive hunger. Liam and Chloe were no longer clumsy trespassers in the world of infidelity. They were its seasoned, discerning inhabitants. They had learned the language of lies, the art of the stolen hour, the geography of plausible alibis. The thrill was no longer rooted in the fear of being caught, but in the sheer audacity of their double lives, in the secret knowledge that they were masters of a game Amelia didn't even know she was playing. The risk itself had become an aphrodisiac, adding a sharp, metallic taste of danger to their encounters that only made them more addictive. This new, reckless confidence was on full display one Saturday evening. The three of them had just come from a charity dinner, a glittering event where Liam and Amelia had played the part of the perfect power couple, and Chloe, her best friend, had been their charming, indispensable courtier. The entire evening had been a tightrope walk of charged glances and fleeting, electric touches under the table. Liam had watched Chloe all night, a vision in a backless midnight blue gown, and the public performance of their platonic friendship was a form of exquisite torture. As soon as they had dropped Chloe off, Liam had feigned a sudden, work-related panic. "God, I'm an idiot," he'd said, snapping his fingers as he pulled into their driveway. "I left the quarterly reports on my desk. I need them for Monday morning. I have to go back and get them." Amelia, tired and unsuspecting, had simply nodded. "Don't be too long," she'd said, giving him a quick, dry kiss before heading inside. The lie was brazen, almost insulting in its simplicity, but it was all he needed. 15 minutes later, he was walking into room 712. Chloe was already there, the midnight blue gown now a silken pool on the floor. She was standing by the window, looking out at the city, wearing nothing but the same black lace lingerie from their first night. It was no longer a weapon of seduction, it was their uniform. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent, a potent cocktail that was now more familiar to him than his wife's. "Did you miss this?" she whispered, her head tilting back to rest on his shoulder. He tightened his grip, his hand spreading across her flat stomach. "Every damn second I'm with her," he breathed, the confession raw, honest, and stripped of all remorse. It was the simple, devastating truth of his new reality. The hesitance of their first encounter was a distant memory. Now, their movements were filled with a hungry, practiced familiarity. He turned her around to face him, his eyes devouring her. He knew this body as well as his own now, yet it never ceased to fascinate him. He had become obsessed with its details, the cartographer of its secret landscapes. He loved the way her collarbones stood out, the exact placement of a small mole above her hip, the incredible softness of her inner thighs. As he unhooked her bra, letting it fall away, she turned and walked towards the bed, a slow, deliberate movement designed for his gaze. He watched her, his attention fixed on the exquisite curve of her back, the indentation of her spine, and the magnificent, perfect swell of her buttocks. The sight of her, the sheer confidence and sensuality of her form, ignited a possessive, almost primal fire within him. This was his. This feeling, this woman, this life, it was the reward he felt he deserved. He followed her to the bed, his hands immediately finding their favorite places, his palms cupping and squeezing the soft, heavy flesh of her backside. She moaned, a low, appreciative sound, as she fell forward onto the mattress. The sounds they made were no longer suppressed. They were a soundtrack to their sin, open and uninhibited, a celebration of their shared desire. They filled the sterile hotel room with the undeniable evidence of their passion, the slick sound of skin on skin, the deep, guttural moans, the sharp, breathless cries. Their dialogue was no longer just the gasps of discovery, but a direct, primal negotiation of pleasure. "Harder, Liam," she would command, her voice thick and demanding. "Oh, God." Right there. And he would obey, driven by the need to please her, to possess her, to mark her as his. "You like that, don't you?" He would growl, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Tell me. I want to hear you say it." And she would crying out her pleasure, her abandon, her submission, which was its own form of power. In these moments, Amelia ceased to exist. She was not a memory, not even a ghost. The world shrank to the four walls of room 712, to the tangled sheets of the king-sized bed, to the glorious, selfish, all-consuming reality of their two bodies moving as one. They were addicts, and this was their fix, a shared oblivion that erased all guilt, all consequences. They were creating their own morality, their own universe, governed by a single, simple law. If it feels good, it cannot be wrong. The climax was a shared, violent paroxysm, a frantic, desperate peak that left them shattered, spent, and gasping in the ensuing silence. They lay for a long time in the afterglow, their limbs tangled, the air thick with the scent of sex. But the silence that followed was not one of guilt. It was one of comfortable, sated companionship. "I saw her watching you tonight," Chloe said, her voice lazy, as she traced a pattern on his sweat-slicked chest. "When you were talking to Judge Miller, the way she looks at you. Like you're a property she owns." Liam grunted, a sound of bitter agreement. "She manages me," he said, "like she manages everything else." Chloe propped herself up on one elbow, her eyes, dark and serious, looking down at him. She reached up and gently touched his collar, her finger and thumb pinching the fabric. "She left some of her lipstick on you," she said, her voice devoid of any jealousy, stating it as a simple fact, like noticing a piece of lint. With a slow, deliberate movement of her thumb, she wiped the faint, pale pink smudge away, erasing the last trace of his wife from his body. The gesture was quiet, intimate, and more possessive than any shouted declaration. It was an act of ownership, of cleansing. He was hers now, and in their secret world there was no room for anyone else. The vague, shapeless anxiety that had been Amelia's constant companion for months had finally begun to harden, crystallizing into the sharp, ugly contours of suspicion. The soft, blurry edges of her unease were gone, replaced by a painful, hyper-focused clarity. She began to watch her husband not as a wife, but as a detective, cataloging the small inconsistencies, the subtle shifts in his behavior, the tiny cracks in the facade of their perfect life. The rationalizations she had clung to for so long, work stress, pressure, fatigue, now felt like flimsy, transparent excuses. She was no longer trying to soothe her own fears. She was actively hunting for the source of them, driven by a dreadful premonition that the truth, whatever it was, would destroy her. The first piece of hard evidence arrived not with a dramatic confession, but in the quiet, mundane glow of a computer screen. It was a Sunday morning, and Amelia was doing their monthly finances, a task she handled with her usual meticulous efficiency. She sat at the sleek minimalist desk in their home office, a cup of herbal tea steaming beside her, and clicked open their joint credit card statement. It was a familiar landscape of charges: Whole Foods, the dry cleaner, dinners at restaurants she recognized, a new set of blueprints she'd ordered. She scrolled methodically, her eyes scanning the neat columns of dates and vendors, and then she saw it, a charge for $187. The vendor was listed as the Crimson Door. The name meant nothing to her, so she quickly Googled it. The search results bloomed on the screen. A high-end, notoriously discreet cocktail lounge in a boutique hotel downtown. Her brow furrowed. She clicked on the transaction details. The charge had been made 2 weeks prior, on a Tuesday night, at 10:43 p.m. She felt a cold prickle of unease. She distinctly remembered that Tuesday. Liam had called her from the office around 7, his voice tired, telling her he was buried in paperwork and would just grab a pizza at his desk. He'd come home after midnight, smelling of stale office air and exhaustion. Her mind raced, desperately trying to construct a plausible explanation. Maybe he'd taken a client there for a last-minute drink? But Liam was a creature of habit. His client spots were a predictable rotation of 3 different steakhouses. And why wouldn't he have mentioned it? The amount was too large for a single person. $187. That was several rounds of very expensive drinks. The discrepancy sat like a stone in her stomach. It was a single, undeniable fact that refused to align with the story she had been told. It was the first loose thread, and she couldn't stop herself from pulling at it. A few days later, another thread appeared. She was gathering the laundry, a routine domestic task she'd performed 1,000 times. She picked up the white dress shirt Liam had worn the previous evening, the one from his late dinner with the partners from Sterling Cooper. As she unbuttoned the collar to pre-treat it, She brought the fabric to her nose, an unconscious habit. She expected to smell his familiar scent, a clean, crisp mix of his cologne and the faint, starchy smell of his skin. Instead, her senses were ambushed. It was a perfume, a woman's perfume. It was a complex, sophisticated scent, jasmine, he thought, with a warm, spicy base note of sandalwood. It was luxurious, expensive, and utterly, completely unfamiliar. It was not her scent. It was not a scent she had ever smelled on any of their friends. It was the fragrant ghost of a stranger. She stood frozen in the middle of their laundry room, the shirt clutched in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. The image of the hotel bar receipt flashed in her mind. A late night, expensive drinks, the scent of another woman. The pieces were beginning to connect, forming a picture so hideous she couldn't bear to look at it. But the final, devastating blow, the one that shattered her denial into a million pieces, came from the person she least expected. It was a Thursday night. Liam was in the shower, the sound of running water, a low roar from the master bathroom. His phone, which he had begun to guard with the vigilance of a secret agent, was sitting on his nightstand, charging. Amelia was tidying the bedroom, folding clothes, her movements stiff with a tension that had become her new normal. Suddenly, the phone screen lit up, a silent, intrusive beacon in the dimly lit room. It buzzed softly against the wooden surface. Ordinarily, she would have ignored it. But now, her suspicion was a physical force, a magnet that pulled her eyes towards that small, glowing rectangle. She saw the notification banner at the top of the screen, a new message, and she saw the name of the sender, Chloe. Her heart stopped. It felt as if the entire world, the very rotation of the earth, had ceased in that single, silent moment. She could read the first line of the message on the lock screen preview. It was more than enough. The words seemed to burn themselves directly onto her brain. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Amelia didn't make a sound. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, staring at the screen, as the entire architecture of her life imploded in absolute silence. The name, Chloe. The words, last night. Suddenly, everything clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening precision. The hotel bar, the perfume, Liam's late nights, and his growing distance. Chloe's overly effusive phone calls, her constant, cloying reassurances that everything was just work stress. It had all been a lie. A carefully constructed, collaborative lie. The two people she loved and trusted most in the entire world, her husband and her best friend. The betrayal was so immense, so absolute, it was almost incomprehensible. It wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy. She felt a wave of nausea so profound she had to grip the edge of the dresser to keep from falling. The sound of the shower was a dull, distant roar. She looked at the closed bathroom door, and she no longer saw her husband. She saw a stranger, a liar. She thought of Chloe's face, her bright smile, her easy laughter, and she felt a rage so cold and pure it burned away every other emotion. The hurt, the confusion, the sadness, they were all incinerated in that single, clarifying flame. The woman who had been aimlessly searching for clues was gone. In her place was a woman who had found a terrible, undeniable truth. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and when she looked at her own pale, shocked face in the mirror, she saw a stranger looking back at her, her eyes dark with a cold, terrifying resolve. The game was over. She knew. And soon, they would know she knew. The knowledge of the betrayal did not break Amelia. It remade her. In the days that followed her discovery of the text message, a profound and terrifying calm settled over her. The frantic anxiety, the desperate search for explanations, the gut-wrenching insecurity, all of it was gone, burned away by the cold, clean fire of certainty. She moved through her days like a phantom in her own life, her voice even, her hands steady, her smile a perfect, meaningless mask. She was an actress playing the part of herself, and she played it flawlessly. She would ask Liam about his day, listen to his fabricated stories of stressful meetings and difficult clients, and nod with a serene, chilling placidity. He was so immersed in the arrogance of his deceit that he failed to notice the change. He mistook her silence for acceptance, her calm for resignation. He had no idea that he was no longer living with his wife. He was living with his judge. She was waiting for the right moment, the final, irrefutable piece of evidence that she needed not for herself, but for the execution of the sentence she had yet to decide upon. It came the following Tuesday. The day unfolded with a sickeningly familiar script. Liam called her in the late afternoon, his voice a practiced performance of weary professionalism. "Babe, it's gonna be another late one," he said, the words smooth and well-rehearsed. "We're trying to close the fiscal quarter, and it's all hands on deck. I'll grab something to eat here. Don't wait up." Amelia stood in their silent kitchen, the phone pressed to her ear, and looked out the window at the setting sun. "Of course," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of a supportive, understanding wife. "Work hard. Be safe." She hung up the phone, and for a moment, she did not move. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace, she picked up her car keys, her purse, and walked out the door. The hunt had begun. She didn't drive erratically. She didn't speed. She moved through the evening traffic with a calm, focused precision. She wasn't following him, not yet. She was going to wait. She drove to a small park a few blocks from their house, and she waited. On her lap, she had her laptop open, tethered to her phone's hotspot. She was logged into the mobile account they shared, a feature she had set up years ago for emergencies and had long since forgotten. Now, it was the instrument of her reckoning. She watched the small blue dot that represented her husband's car as it sat stationary at his office building downtown. For an hour, it didn't move. Then, at 7:45 p.m., the dot began to slide across the map. She watched its progress, her breath held tight in her chest. It moved south, away from the freeways that would take him home. It moved west, into the glittering, affluent streets of the Cherry Creek neighborhood. It moved with the unerring certainty of a predator returning to its lair. The dot slowed, then stopped, blinking patiently over the exact location of the boutique hotel that housed the Crimson Door. Amelia closed the laptop. The cool, detached confirmation from the screen was all she needed. Now, for the visual. She started the car and drove, her route calm and methodical, a stark contrast to the maelstrom of betrayal that was raging within her. The hotel lobby was an oasis of quiet, expensive taste. The air smelled of leather and lilies. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers. She moved through the space with the poise of a regular guest, her expression unreadable. She walked towards the low, seductive glow of the Crimson Door lounge. She paused in the entryway, a ghost in the shadows, and scanned the room. And there they were. They were tucked away in a dark corner booth, their heads bent close together in a bubble of shared intimacy. A single candle flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on their faces. It was a scene of such casual, devastating betrayal that it stole the breath from her lungs. Chloe, her best friend, was laughing, her head thrown back, her hand resting on Liam's forearm. Liam, her husband, was looking at Chloe with a look of such adoration, such focused intensity, that Amelia felt a physical blow, as if all the air had been punched from her body. It was a look he had not given her in years. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from Chloe's cheek, his fingers lingering for a moment. The gesture was so tender, so proprietary. It was like watching a scene from a movie about two people deeply in love, a movie in which she, Amelia, had no part. She stood there for a full minute, memorizing every detail of her own destruction, the color of Chloe's dress, the brand of whiskey in Liam's glass, the way their bodies instinctively leaned towards one another. This was enough. This vision would be burned into her memory forever. But she needed more. She needed to know the full extent of the world they had built behind her back. She watched as Liam paid the bill, as they slid out of the booth, his hand resting possessively on the small of Chloe's back. They walked past her, so close she could smell Chloe's familiar, traitorous perfume, and headed for the elevators. They were laughing, oblivious. Amelia waited, counting to 60 in the silent, screaming chaos of her mind. Then, she followed. She walked down the hushed, carpeted corridor, her footsteps making no sound. She didn't need to guess the room. The number was seared into her memory from his credit card statements. 712. She stopped outside the heavy wooden door, her hand hovering just inches from its surface. She could hear them inside. First, the sound of their voices, low and murmuring. Then, Chloe's laugh, a sound Amelia had once loved, now a sound that was utterly grotesque, a sound that was muffled by the thick wood of the door that separated her world from theirs. She heard the distinctive clink of ice in a glass, the soft thud of a door closing perhaps to the bathroom. Then, a different sound, a soft, rhythmic creaking, a muffled moan, another. The sounds were unmistakable, a primal, universal language of intimacy and pleasure, an intimacy that was stolen, a pleasure that was built upon the ruins of her trust. She stood there, outside the door to room 712, and listened to the sounds of her husband making love to her best friend. She did not knock. She did not scream, she did not cry. She simply stood, and she listened, bearing witness to the final, absolute truth of their betrayal. The unveiling was complete. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, she turned around. Her face was a pale, emotionless mask. She walked back down the silent corridor, her posture erect, her steps measured. She moved through the opulent lobby, a queen leaving a kingdom that had been burned to the ground. She stepped out into the cold night air, the chill, a welcome shock against her skin. She got into her car, the familiar space, now feeling alien and strange. She started the engine and drove away, not towards home because she no longer had one, but into the endless, anonymous river of headlights, the terrible, liberating truth, her only passenger. She drove for hours, with no destination in mind. The city streets became a meaningless labyrinth, the traffic lights and glowing signs a blur of color against the profound darkness that had consumed her. She wasn't crying. The pain was too deep for tears, a cold, solid mass that had settled in her chest where her heart used to be. The images played on a continuous, brutal loop in her mind. Liam's adoring gaze across the candlelit table, Chloe's triumphant laugh, the way his hand rested on her back, the muffled sounds of pleasure from behind the door of room 712. Each image was a fresh incision, carving away another piece of the woman she used to be. Finally, around 2 a.m, she found herself back on her own street. The house, their house, was dark, except for a single light she had left on in the living room. It looked like a stage, waiting for the final act of a tragedy. She walked through the door into the crushing silence. The home she had designed with such love and care now felt alien, a meticulously curated museum of a life that was a lie. Every object was a traitor. A framed photograph on the mantelpiece showed the three of them, Liam, Amelia, and Chloe, smiling on a ski trip, their arms slung around each other in a portrait of happy, perfect friendship. She felt a surge of nausea so violent she had to brace herself against the wall. A beautiful vase on the console table had been a birthday gift from Chloe. A set of expensive whiskey glasses had been a gift from Amelia to Liam for celebrating his victories. The whole house was a shrine to their shared deceit. She didn't turn on any more lights. She walked over to the armchair where she had spent so many nights waiting for him, and she sat down in the shadows, and she waited. An hour later, she heard the sound of his key in the lock. The door opened and closed with a soft, practiced click. He moved into the darkened foyer like a thief, believing her to be asleep upstairs. She watched his silhouette as he took off his jacket, his movements heavy with a sated, weary satisfaction. He was carrying the scent of the hotel room, the faint, lingering aroma of Chloe's perfume and their shared secret world. He finally turned and saw her, a darker shadow in the armchair, and he flinched, a small, startled gasp escaping his lips. "Amelia," he said, his voice a low, cautious whisper. "God, you scared me. What are you doing sitting in the dark?" He started to construct the lie, the final, pathetic layer on a mountain of them. The quarterly reports were a nightmare. "I'm completely exhausted." She didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She let his empty words hang in the dead air between them, letting the silence stretch until it was taut and screaming. He shifted his weight, a flicker of uncertainty, then dread, finally dawning in his eyes. He could feel the change in the atmosphere, the icy, terrible stillness that had replaced the warm comfort of their home. When she finally spoke, her voice was unnervingly calm, a flat, dead thing devoid of any emotion. It was a stranger's voice. "How was your meeting, Liam?" He opened his mouth to answer, to build on the lie, but she continued, her words precise and deadly. "I hope the whiskey at the Crimson Door was worth it. You should be more careful. It leaves quite a charge on the credit card." The color drained from his face, The shock was absolute, his composure shattering like glass. He stared at her, his mouth agape, his mind frantically trying to compute how she could possibly know. He looked like a cornered animal, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him in an instant. But she wasn't finished. She delivered the final, fatal blow, her voice dropping to an even quieter, more devastating tone. "And please, Liam, you must tell me, how is Chloe?" His name, her name, spoken together in that dead, quiet room. The sound of it, the simple, horrific truth of it, broke him. He made a small, choking sound, his body seeming to shrink in on itself. There was no denial. There were no excuses. There was nothing left to say. His silence was a deafening confession, an admission of every lie, every stolen touch, every single, calculated betrayal. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, simply disintegrated before her eyes, leaving only a hollowed-out shell of guilt and shame. Amelia slowly rose from the chair. She felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a vast, arctic emptiness. She looked at the pathetic, broken man standing in the ruins of their life, and she felt no pity. She felt nothing at all. She walked past him, not even bothering to look at him, and went up the stairs. She didn't know where he went. She didn't know if he stayed for 5 minutes or an hour. She just knew that sometime before the dawn, she heard the front door close for the last time. And then, there was only silence. The sun rose, casting long, mournful shadows across the silent rooms. Amelia stood by the large window in their bedroom, the one that overlooked the city, and watched the world awaken to a day that felt like the end of the world. The house was no longer a home. It was a tomb, a memorial to a marriage and a friendship that were now dead and buried. The future, which had always seemed like a clear, well-designed blueprint, was now a terrifying, blank void. She had lost her husband and her best friend in a single, catastrophic blow. She was alone, adrift in the wreckage, with only the ghosts of their lies for company. She didn't know who she was anymore, or what would come next. All she knew was the profound, echoing silence of a life that had been utterly and completely betrayed. The story didn't end. It just stopped, leaving her there, a solitary figure in the morning light, forever haunted by the devastating cost of a forbidden desire.